There was a fascinating study conducted by Harvard University that tracked teachers over a 30-year period of time, looking at the ones that had the greatest long-term impact on students' lives. The researchers discovered something very surprising. The teachers who were rated the highest at the end of the school year, the ones who got the best evaluations, the most appreciation, the most immediate recognition, weren't necessarily the ones who had the most lasting influence. Instead, many of the teachers who made the deepest impacts into some of these kids' lives were the ones who had been strict about homework. They had pushed students to work harder, and they maintained high standards even when the students complained. These teachers reported that they often ended the school year, however, feeling very unappreciated and wondering if they really were making any kind of difference in the lives of the students at all. I experienced this firsthand when I went to college. I went to college later on in life, and I had an English 2 teacher by the name of Miss Bennett, and she was extremely demanding, especially towards the women in her class. For some reason, it seemed like she just had it out for the young women in the class. She reminded me of that cranky lady in Monsters, Inc. I think we have a picture of her here, named Roz. You guys remember this lady? She was the key master and the administrator for Scare Floor F. And she had that gravelly voice, and she had that famous line that says, "I'm watching you, Wazowski. I'm watching you." You remember that? Well, that was Miss Bennett. Like, "I'm watching you, White. I am watching you." That was kind of the way she talked to everybody. And at the beginning of the semester, we had about 30 students in the class, but by the end, we had dwindled down to about 7. And almost all of us were men. And so it was one of the hardest classes I ever faced, and I was just getting started. And so, I was too embarrassed to admit it at the time, but I probably thought she was too harsh. She, like most students, I measured her effectiveness as a teacher by how I felt walking into her classroom each day. And to be honest, most days I just felt exhausted and challenged and somewhat beaten down by her. But years later, when I was struggling through the rigorous demands of Dallas Seminary, I remembered Miss Bennett, and something occurred to me. That the academic discipline that Miss Bennett had drilled into me, the careful analysis of a written text and, the precision in writing, her refusal to accept mediocre work, well, that's what I exactly needed for seminary and for ministry, was to go through that. And I realized that God had used her to prepare me for challenges that I could have never anticipated in ministry. So I drove back to the college, and I found her office and walked around the corner, and there she was sitting there, and she looked up and she said, "Yeah, what do you want?" And I just told her, how much her demanding standards had meant to my life and to my ministry, and how much I appreciated it. And I will forget the look on her face. I mean, I don't think anyone had ever come back to say thank you to her before. And she was visibly shaken by it. The study that in Harvard concluded that the most meaningful work often feels the most futile while you're doing it. And Miss Bennett had been faithful to her calling as a teacher, maintaining high standards, even when the students dropped out of her class by the dozens. And even when no one thanked her, she went home oftentimes wondering if what she was doing was making any difference at all. And how often that's true in our walk with God, is it not? I mean, how often does your faithfulness feel futile simply because you just don't see the fruits yet? Maybe you're single and you're staying celibate, waiting for godly marriage while your friends who sleep around seem to find love faster. Or maybe you're staying in a difficult marriage, working through problems while your divorced friends seem to be happier and living the dream life in a new relationship. Perhaps you've been waiting for someone who shares your values while watching non-Christians find seemingly perfect relationships. Maybe you're homeschooling, or you have homeschooled, and you're paying extra money for your kids to have a Christian education, while public school families have more money and they take vacations and they have all kinds of activities, and it just looks like their kids are doing fine. Maybe you're turning down job opportunities, or you have turned down job opportunities to be at your kids' events while other absent fathers seem to just have more successful families. Maybe you're faithfully giving, while at the same time, sometimes struggling to even pay your bills. And you're watching non-givers afford luxury cars and vacation homes and all that. Maybe you're supporting missions and ministry in some way while having to decline other types of events because of budget constraints that brings to you. Maybe you're driving an old car and you're living modestly while materialistic neighbors constantly seem to be upgrading and they just seem happier with all their stuff. Maybe you're battling cancer or some other disease, despite years of clean living or relatively clean living, while your chain-smoking, drinking friends stay healthy. Maybe you're being marginalized or even called hateful because you believe in traditional marriage while your progressive friends are celebrated for their progressiveness type things. Maybe you've been or have been or are being vilified for your protection of life, while abortion supporters are praised as heroes. Maybe you've been labeled a bigot for your biblical views, while secular viewpoints are considered enlightened now in our day. Maybe you stayed on with struggling ministries, while friends who church hop seem to be finding all kinds of fulfilling experiences. Maybe you're a business owner, or maybe you have been a business owner, or even an employee, and you refuse to provide services that violate your conscience. Or even you've left lucrative jobs or businesses or enterprises because they conflict with your Christian principles. And if I'm honest, as a pastor, this is one of the most common struggles I encounter with people. It's not the big theological questions about the Trinity or predestination. It's this quiet but persistent question that people have. Does my faith actually make any meaningful difference in my life? Is my faithfulness worth the cost? Some days, even I feel like there are no clear consequences for ignoring God, or that sometimes it doesn't appear that there's obvious rewards for obeying Him. And many times we know about the Lord's commands that His believers will be disciplined, but we see believers who maybe live a profligate life and they just seem to get along fine without discipline. Sometimes that clouds our thinking about that. Well, this morning, some of you may have walked in here carrying this exact weight that I've been describing in some way. And the weight of pondering whether God actually shows up in the real world is relevant to you. The weight of questioning whether your faithfulness is foolishness, the weight of feeling like your loyalty to God is a luxury that you just cannot afford. And especially when the world seems to reward things that are exactly the opposite. Well, if that's you, I want you to know that you're not alone. And more importantly, I want you to know that more than 2,500 years ago, God's people felt exactly the same way, and God had something specific to say about it. So they were asking the same question we want to ask and answer here this morning, namely, what should we do when serving God seems pointless and unrewarding? What do we do when serving God seems pointless and unrewarding? Like many of you here this morning, many of them had been faithful in Israel. They'd been obedient. They had been loyal to God. Then they were tired. They were tired of feeling like their devotion didn't matter, tired of watching people who ignored God's, seemingly get ahead. The writer of Proverbs knew this temptation too well, and I think he encapsulated perfectly the core of our message this morning. It's in Proverbs 24, verses 19 through 20, and he writes, "Don't be agitated by evildoers, and don't envy the wicked. For the evil have no future. The lamp of the wicked will be put out." I want to first read our passage in its entirety. We're going to pick up in Malachi chapter 3, beginning in verse 13. And if you have your Bible, I'm using the Christian Standard Bible translation. And if not, we have the words up on the screen. But let's read the passage. Your words against me are harsh, says the Lord. Yet you ask, what have we spoken against you? You have said, it is useless to serve God. What have we gained by keeping his requirements and walking mournfully before the Lord of armies? So now we consider the arrogant to be fortunate. Not only do those who commit wickedness prosper, they even test God and escape. At that time, those who feared the Lord spoke to one another. The Lord took notice and listened. So a book of remembrance was written before him for those who had feared the Lord and had high regard for his name. They will be mine, says the Lord of armies, my own possession on the day I'm preparing. I will have compassion on them as a man has compassion on his son who serves him. So you will see again the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and one who does not serve him. First thing we want to look at this morning is that God doesn't dismiss their feelings in this first verse, does he? How dare you question me is what he didn't say that. Instead, he acknowledges their frustration, and then he reveals three crucial truths that changes everything. And the first one is, and this is on your outline, God recognizes your loyal service. God recognizes your loyal service. First, let's be honest about what these people are feeling. Look back at verse 14. You have said it's useless to serve God. What have we gained by keeping his requirements and walking mournfully before the Lord of armies? Now remember, these were not rebels. These were not people who had given up on God entirely. These were faithful people for the most part who had been doing the right things and actually doing them for the right reasons. But they were very discouraged by the lack of results that they faced. They had been back in the land for 100 years, and they were still under the reproach of their enemies, and the Messiah had not come. The Hebrew word for useless here is shaw, and it means empty, vain, without purpose. Some translations may even translate this as futile. They felt like their faithfulness was a waste of time. So can you identify with that? So what causes this feeling that our loyal service to God often goes unnoticed? What's kind of the emotional underpinnings of that? Well, let me suggest three things. First, we live in an instant gratification culture. You live in an instant gratification culture. We're used to immediate feedback, like on social media, instant messages, same-day delivery. Amazon's there the same day. Can you believe that? But God's recognition often works on a very different timetable, doesn't it? And it doesn't often meet our expectations. When we don't see immediate results from our faithfulness, we just kind of over time assume that no one is watching. Secondly, we measure success by worldly standards. The world rewards visibility, it rewards applause and, pleasurable outcomes. But most loyal service happens in that quiet, ordinary moments that no human ever sees, right? Changing diapers at 3 a.m., choosing honesty when no one would have even known that you had lied, forgiving when you have every right to be angry, or, those types of acts of loyalty don't get press releases whenever you do them, do they? Thirdly, we compare, and this is so important, we compare our behind-the-scenes faithfulness with other people's highlight reels. You guys following me? We compare what's going on in our life behind the scenes with other people's highlight reels, the stuff they post on Facebook or on their Instagram account, or what they want other people to see or talk about in public. We see our own struggles, our own doubts, and we see our own failures right up close, don't we? And we see other successes from a distance. And so that's somewhat deceiving. We think everybody else has it easier because we don't see their private battles. So that's very deceptive to us. But here's something they don't understand. And what we, I think, often forget as believers, God doesn't evaluate our service the way the world does. You remember 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, God reminds us that man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on what? The heart. Listen to me carefully. When the world looks at your faithful service and sees nothing special, God looks at your heart and he sees everything. Every time. When others dismiss your integrity, is naive, God recognizes it as beautiful. And when people overlook your sacrificial love, God notices every one of the selfless acts of service that you perform. God sees it. He never misses it. Your late night prayers for your children aren't invisible to God. And he hears every word of them. Your choice to forgive when you've been deeply hurt doesn't go unnoticed. God sees that. He notices every time. He sees the courage that it takes you to step up and to live for him. Your decision to give when money is tight isn't overlooked. God recognizes your trust in him when you do that. Your faithfulness in that difficult marriage that you might be experiencing. You know, those seasons can be very hard, and you have to know those times are not wasted with God. Your honest work when no one watching is not meaningless. God observes your character in those moments, and that's what he sees. While we're looking for the results, we're looking for the benefits. The psalmist reminds us in Psalm 139, verses 1 through 4, that he knows every thought, motive, and sacrifice. Look what it says. Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I stand up. You understand my thoughts from far away. You observe my travels and my rest. You are aware of all my ways. Before a word is even on my tongue, you know all about it. Hebrews 4:13 tells us that no creature is hidden from him, but all things are naked and exposed to the eyes of them who must give an account. I recently read about this janitor who worked at this children's hospital and who had worked night shift for over 20 years. Nobody really knew his name even, but you know, he didn't get any recognition and he wasn't on any committee, but every night he would quietly pray over each room as he cleaned it. Every night. He would leave little encouraging notes for the nurses. Every night he would make sure that when families arrived in a crisis, they walked into a space that they felt, in which they felt cared for. Can you imagine that? The administrator wanted to throw him a party, but he wanted to decline it because, you know, he says, I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it for God and for the families. That was enough for him. Just years of serving in that way. That's the kind of service that God recognizes, not the flashy public kind that always gets people's applause. It's that quiet, consistent, heart level kind that flows from love. God sees that, and he always notices it. God recognizes what other people want to ignore. And so your service is not invisible to him. It's precious to him. Every single act of faithfulness, no matter how small, for God's sake, no matter how unnoticed by others, is seen by him. And he treasures that, especially whenever you do it from a grateful heart. Well, Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 4 that we shouldn't judge anything prematurely before the Lord comes, who will both bring to light what is hidden in darkness and reveal the intentions of our heart. And then praise will come to each one from God. Did you catch that? Each one will receive praise from God, not just pastors, not just missionaries, not just leaders, but each faithful servant will receive from the Lord for their loyal service that may have been gone on unnoticed for years. So, but God doesn't just recognize your service in the moment. Number 2 on your outline says God remembers your loyal heart. He remembers your loyal heart. Look at verse 16. At that time, those who feared the Lord spoke to one another. The Lord took notice and listened. So a book of remembrance was written before him for those who feared the Lord and had high regard for his name. Because evidently there's 2 different groups here, and there's like the Lord was in the first part of this declaration. He's given the attention to those who were speaking that worshiping God was useless. But there's always a remnant, isn't there? A faithful remnant that have voices of thanksgiving and have voices of faith. And God seems to kind of turn to these people and goes, look, there's 2 times of conversations going on. You have these people here, but then you have these other people over here. A book of remembrance. God is keeping records. Isn't that amazing? this isn't about God having a bad memory here. He's writing these things down in his book. This is about God treasuring your faithfulness so much that he records it permanently. You don't lose it. I kind of think of God's rewards. There's certain rewards that the Bible talks about for us that we will receive. Some of them are instant winners, as it were. Some of the things that we do, we're going to get rewarded for that, and it comes in a variety of ways. It could be just peace with God. It could be just tranquility of heart. You could just be receiving the satisfaction of your labors. You know, God's blessings in these moments are not always monetarily, and they're not always something that we would register as a blessing. But it seems like God is writing, to these people about recognizing that there are certain types of rewards that we'll never lose. That God's going to remember what we did in that moment. There's other types of rewards that the Bible says that we lose. There's a burning, there's a purging of those kinds of rewards. But if you look at rewards, clearly there's certain rewards that you're never going to lose. God's going to acknowledge that and reward you for it. Psalm 56:8 says, God, you have recorded my wanderings, put my tears in a bottle. Are they not in your book? We see this idea of God recording this. Nehemiah 13:14 says, remember me this, my God, and don't erase the deeds of faithful love I have done for the house of my God and for its services. And look how God answers his prayer. I mean, we're reading it 2,500 years later, and it's in his Bible for all time, isn't it? There's a woman that lives in our community. She has been caring for her mother with dementia for the last 6 years. And every day she drives somewhat across town to help her dad with the medications and meals and the basic care that she needs during this time. And some days her mom recognizes her. Some days she doesn't. Some days her mother is like very grateful for her being there. Other days she's yelling at her. Some days she gets angry and confused. Other days she's lucid and at peace. And the world doesn't see this daily sacrifice that this daughter makes. And there's no performance review, really, for daughters who take care of their ailing parents, is there? But God sees that. There's no salary that we get for loving others, but God knows and pays back. God sees every meal prepared with patience. He notices all the gentle words that we speak to others, and he's writing it down. I just find that amazing. He's writing it down. This book of remembrance is not just a metaphor either. It's a reality that shapes eternity. Revelation 20:12 speaks of books being opened. You don't have to turn there. And also Daniel 7:10, you can jot that down. It describes thousands upon thousands of books, because there's thousands upon people, but thousands and thousands upon books that are going to be open to God's presence. God remembers everything. And so your loyal heart matters to God so much that he's keeping a permanent record of it. So this leads us to the most stunning truth of all. God doesn't just recognize your faithfulness, he rewards it. Look at number 3. God rewards your faithful life. Verse 17, they will be mine, says the Lord of armies. They will be mine. That is amazing. My own possession, the idea there in Hebrew is my precious possession. They're my precious possession. Do you know that whenever you are serving the Lord out of love for him, that he looks on you, you are his precious possession. He calls you his. I will have compassion on them as a man has compassion on the son who serves him. So you will again see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve him. You do not see the difference right now. We do not see the differences oftentimes between a person who wants to be loyal to God and somebody who doesn't. We're not seeing the differences, but God said there is going to be a day when everybody's going to see the difference. Everybody's going to recognize what you've done for him. 3 incredible promises here. It says, first, you belong to God as a treasured possession. The Hebrew word here is sagula, and it refers to a king's personal treasure. The most valuable, so it's the most valuable things that he would have in his vault, per se. And that's how God sees you living loyalty for him. Secondly, God will show you the same compassion a father shows a faithful son. You know, I have a son. Some of you have sons. And my son's not perfect. He's never been perfect. But how often do you find yourself showing compassion, taking into consideration? It seems like the one thing he does a year to show his love for me is worth all of the craziness he puts us through the rest of the months, doesn't it, right? Maybe my son was great. I had a great son. He hardly gave us any problems, but none of our sons are perfect. And I just can identify with that, is you have compassion on them. I remember that one time 9 months ago, you're actually not self-centered, you know? That was kind of nice, and it made me proud. So God does the same thing. This is a warm familial love that God has for you. Third, you will see the difference your faithfulness makes. You will see the difference your faithfulness. Not always immediately, but eventually. God promises that loyal living and selfish living will have different outcomes. There is going to be a day when it's going to become very clear. Jesus spoke of the faithful servant hearing in Matthew 25:21. This is what I want to hear. Well done, good and faithful servant. Isn't that what you want to hear him say? Share your master's joy. Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 3:8 that each one will receive his own reward according to his own labor. He's going to take into account everything you have to give. He's going to take into account your background. He's going to take into account where you started from. He's going to take into account your own personality and your own cognitive abilities and the way you look, whether you got pretty privilege or brain privilege or whatever these things. He's going to take all of that and he's going to put it into his great mind, and he's going to come back with a proper and perfect reward for you. David and I were talking about this yesterday, and we're talking about everybody, God is so gracious. Not everybody's going to, there is going to be a real sense of loss for those of us who do not live for the Lord. There is, the Bible talks about that. But all of us are going to receive much more than what we deserve, right? Even in that moment. So watch parents on any playground, and you're going to see two approaches. Parents who set clear boundaries, they enforce consequences, and they teach their kids to work for the things that they want. And then you have the other ones who are parents who give their kids anything they want to avoid conflict or just to keep them quiet and distracted. Two different types of parents. God's the first one. In the moment, the permissive parent seems to have happier children, don't they? In the moment. And the parents seem to have easier days as well when they're giving them everything they want. You throw, you throw an iPad in their face to keep them quiet. And you allow the internet to raise them, all that kind of stuff that we want to do, but we don't dare do, right? The permissive parents seem to have happier children and easier days, but follow these families for 20 years and see what happens. You'll often find that the children who over time learned discipline and delayed gratification became more successful, more resilient adults. And while those who got everything they wanted, they oftentimes will struggle with motivation and responsibility. So it's what we might call that parenting paradox. The approach that seems harder in the moment often produces the better long-term outcomes. We had a room full of engineers and physicians and all this, and you always do a cost-benefit analysis. You have to think about your life. What's it going to cost me now and for the benefit later? And God has a benefit for us later. Sometimes now, but oftentimes later. So God's reward for faithful living extends well beyond this life. Jesus promises in Revelation 22:12, look, I'm coming soon, and my reward is with me to repay the person according to his work. His reward's with him. That word's mythos, and it is repayment for something due. So there are certain things that you and I cannot earn, but there are certain things that God has obligated himself to pay you back for doing. Like as a parent, when you have your kids in the home, there are certain responsibilities they have just by nature of them being part of the family, and you don't reward them. You get to eat and live indoors. That's your reward, right? But there are certain things that you give your kid that's up and above that, and you try to motivate good behavior. Well, God has the same thing for us. It's reward. If you do something now, there's certain things God will do for you. It's a reward in that way, and he's obligated himself to that, and that's a wonderful thought. Second, at the end of his life, Paul wrote in 2 Timothy he could confidently say this: there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day, he says. So what does that mean for you? How do you live differently when you know that God recognizes, remembers, and rewards your loyal life? Would that make any difference in your life? If you knew that he recognizes, remembers, and rewards your loyal life. If you walked in here today and you felt like your loyalty to God has been pointless, I want you to hear this clearly. Your faithfulness is not invisible. It is not forgotten, and it is not unrewarded. God sees it all. If you're a spouse struggling to love well when your marriage feels one-sided, God sees every act of grace, every choice to forgive, and every decision to serve instead of keep score. If you're a parent and you're exhausted from the daily grind of raising kids with patience and wisdom, God notices every bedtime prayer that you give. He notices every teaching moment that you make. He notices every sacrifice that you're making for their good. He notices these things. If you're a student choosing to maintain integrity when others are cheating their way to better grades, God sees that. He recognizes your characters even when others don't. And one day, believe me, they're going to see it too. If you're an employee and you're doing excellent work, even when your boss doesn't appreciate it, God sees your faithfulness and he's going to reward that. If you're caring for aging parents, volunteering in ministries that feel thankless, or simply trying to live with integrity in a world that seems to reward the opposite, God's recognition, remembrance, and reward will make it all worthwhile one day. So, what are some practical steps for us to renew our loyalty towards God? First, remember that your audience is God, not people. That is so key. When you serve, when you sacrifice, when you choose faithfulness over personal gain, you're not performing for human applause, you're living for an audience of one. God sees everything and he forgets nothing. Number two, connect with other faithful people. Their faithfulness rubs off on you. Their faithfulness is an example that oftentimes spurs you on towards love and good works. Many of you spend a lot of hours, a lot of time out in the world away from people who carry the same values that you carry about God and spirituality and culture and sexuality and all these other things, and you spend hours with them. You need to be involved with God's people. They infuse you with example. They infuse you with encouragement. They infuse you with a sense of what could be. And you'll grow stronger from it. Find people who choose faithfulness and encourage each other in that journey along. Then thirdly, keep an eternal perspective. This is so hard. David and I were talking about this. This is so hard. You know, the rewards of living loyally are not always immediate, but they are certain. They are certain. When you're tempted to think faithfulness is futile, remember that God's timeline is longer than yours and his rewards are greater than you can ever imagine. Fourth, root your obedience in the gospel, not in willpower. Root your obedience in the gospel, not in willpower. You don't serve God to earn his love. You serve him because you already have his love. You see the difference? Christ's death and resurrection means you're already God's treasured possession if you are believing in him for eternal life. Your loyalty flows from that gratitude and not from guilt, or it should. Imagine what your life would look like if you really believe that God recognizes, remembers, and rewards your loyalty. What would it look like? Imagine the peace of knowing that your faithfulness really does matter, even when no one else notices what you're doing. Imagine the joy of serving from love rather than obligation. Imagine what that would feel like. Imagine what that would look like. Imagine the confidence of knowing that your loyalty to God be vindicated in the end. You know, that's not just a nice dream That's a reality that God offers every person who's willing to live loyally for him. Remembering Miss Bennett, my English teacher, remember her? Roz. For years, she faithfully maintained high standards. She pushed her students to excel and refused to lower her expectations, even after class after class after class of students dropped out and dwindled away. No one even thanking her, even when she probably went home nights wondering if her work even mattered. She was doing exactly what that 30-year study discovered from Harvard. The most meaningful work often feels the most futile while you're doing it. The most important work often feels the most futile while you're doing it. When I walked into her office those years later, it's probably maybe 5 years later, I realized something profound. She had been faithful to her calling long before she could see the results. And it may have been just her mean attitude. I don't know. I'll leave that to God's judgment. But she had invested in my future not knowing if I'd ever appreciate it. And she had done the hard work of teaching with excellence, trusting that it mattered even when there was no immediate evidence. And when I thanked her, when she saw that her faithful work had actually made a lasting difference, I really noticed something somewhat beautiful in her face. I saw what happens when faithfulness is recognized. And it made me think, what's your face going to look like when God recognizes your faithfulness on that day? Imagine that. When all of these things that seem to just go by the wayside, God brings up. And he says, you don't even know you did this, but this warmed my heart. This made me glad that you're mine. Think about that day. That's exactly what God is teaching us here in Malachi 3. Your faithful service may seem futile now, but God sees a bigger picture than you do. And your loyalty may seem unrewarded, but God is working through the faithfulness, and you really are not in a place to understand what that faithfulness is going to bring one day. Maybe not until eternity. So here's what we want to remember. When loyalty to God seems futile, know that God recognizes your loyal service, remembers your loyal heart, and rewards your loyal life. Ms. Bennett taught me that loyal work can have a lasting influence in someone's life, even when the results are invisible. Your faithfulness is not futile. It is creating impact that you may not see for years or even for eternity. And God is writing a story through your loyalty that we cannot imagine at the moment. So we should be grateful. So don't give up. Don't quit. Don't let temporary invisibility impact your loyalty towards God. Keep serving. Keep sacrificing. Keep choosing faithfulness. God is watching. God is remembering. God is going to reward you. And someday, maybe in this life or maybe in the next, you and I will discover that your faithful service mattered more than you ever imagined.